All right, so welcome to the fourth video on dimensional analysis. So in this one, we're going to cover the very basics of unit conversions. So that includes what exactly are conversion factors and how do I use them? And then we're going to go through two examples, one where we change units of distance, and then another where we're changing units of velocity or speed. Okay, so to start off with, I have to really talk about what exactly are conversion factors. Um, so conversion factors, they really rely upon a previous idea about multiplying or dividing units. And they're essentially just a ratio between two different units, and they express like a relationship between those two units. Maybe it's a little bit easier when I write it out, right? So if I say, so for example, this is a conversion factor for distance, right? Where I have something measuring meters and something measuring kilometers. And those are both measurements of distance, right? So they measure the same exact thing. But in this case, I'm telling you how many meters are in 1 kilometer, okay? So this conversion factor lets you convert between two different things that measure the same idea. So they both measure distance, but it lets me convert from one unit, meters, to another unit, kilometer. A couple more examples is that we have a kilojoule is 1,000 joules. And just keep noticing when I'm writing these down that these units measure the same idea. It's just they're not the same unit, right? So torr and atmosphere are both measurements of pressure. This is just relating how many torr are in 1 atmosphere, how many kilojoules are in 1,000 joules, how many meters are in 1 kilometer. We'll do a couple more. So 1,000 milligrams will get you 1 gram. If you're unfamiliar with these terms like milli and kilo, I'd recommend looking at the unit prefixes. There's a lot of Wikipedia pages about those. 1 calorie to 4.184 joules. These both measure different forms of energy, but this is just the conversion of telling you how many calories are in exactly 4.184 joules, or more specifically, how many joules are in 1 calorie. So just once again, just pounding this in, that conversion factors, the two terms in them, they measure the same exact thing, right? So we have a conversion factor. I have one for feet to meters, which is just units of length. There's a conversion factor for calories to joules, which is just a unit describing energy, and there's a conversion factor for torr and atmosphere, which measure pressure. So we can pretty easily switch what units we're measuring something in by using these conversion factors. If I don't like measuring something, pressure and torr, and I want an atmosphere, I can just use this conversion factor to get there. And just a little note that when I write these things and I put calorie or in the numerator and joules in the denominator, they can be flipped and mean the same exact thing. Depending on your situation and your problem that you're solving, determines which one of these is in the denominator or the numerator. Okay, so how do I switch between these, right? So we'll do a really basic example. We'll talk about going from inches to feet, right? So you should know that 12 inches is 1 foot. What an awful one. So just knowing this idea is pretty powerful, right? Because it lets us convert from two entirely separate units. It lets us convert from inches to feet. And also vice versa, right? I can go from feet to inches. So to convert those, right, I need a ratio. So I could say that there are 12 inches in 1 foot. I could also write it the other way, right? I could say there is 1 foot in 12 inches. So when you're doing a conversion, you need to cancel out the units you start with and end up with the units you want. So this means that the units will have to cancel in your ratio, right? So in this ratio right here, this conversion factor. To do this, you have to understand from earlier that video we had about multiplying and dividing units by each other. But we'll do a quick example just to sort of introduce this idea. So we'll ask how many inches are in 1 foot. Oh, sorry. Let's do 6 feet. That's a little bit better. Right, okay, so let's write out what I start with. So I start with 6 feet. That's great. Okay, so I know how to convert from inches to feet, right? I have one of these two conversion factors at the top. But remember what I said about that. We need to cancel out the units we don't want. So we start with feet, and I don't want feet, right? Because this problem is asking to get me to inches. So I need to cancel out feet. And by doing that, I'd have to pick something that has feet in the denominator, which would be this one, right? Feet, foot, same thing. Ignore the laws of grammar. So my conversion factor in this case, I would write it this way in 1 foot. Okay, so remember that when I multiply units, I end up actually, my new unit is just the units multiplied by each other. So in this case, I have foot times inches over 1 foot. Okay, well, I have foot in the numerator and I have foot in the denominator, so those can cancel out. And now I'm just left with 72 inches. So just once again to say this, when you're doing a conversion, you're gonna need to cancel out units in your conversion factor. And whatever you're looking for, so in this case, looking for inches, determines how you would set up this conversion factor. Do I set it up with inches in the numerator or with inches in the denominator? That will be true for every single unit conversion you'd ever do. So let's do one that's a little bit more complicated. Let's go from changing 60 miles per hour into, well, some number. Well, we want to convert it to kilometers per second, right? Because we want those SI units. So we start off with what we're given, right? So we're given 60 miles. And remember, per means that I put that in the denominator now. Per 1 hour. If you're unfamiliar with how to write it like this, I would say to go back to the first video in this whole series. So changing units is kind of like connecting the dots, right? I have a starting place and I use that to give me hints sort of on where to go. And if I follow all these hints, eventually I get to where I want to be. So let's deal with getting miles into kilometers first. So let's just deal with these units in the numerator. Well, I don't really know of a conversion factor for miles to kilometer off the top of my head. But I do know there's a conversion factor for miles to feet, right? There's 5,280 feet in a mile. So just write it up top here, right? There's 5,280 feet in 1 mile. Okay. Well, okay. I need miles to cancel out, so I got to put miles in the denominator, which means that, okay, well, 5,280 feet has to go up in the numerator. And whenever you do really long unit conversions, I'd always just recommend canceling out the units that you already see match, right? So I have miles in the numerator and miles in the denominator. I know those will match and they'll cancel each other out. So right now I have 60 times 5,280 feet over 1 hour. Well, okay, feet's not exactly kilometers yet, but I do know that I can convert from feet to meters. That's a pretty easy conversion. That was one we listed earlier, right? So we had 0.305 meters on 1 foot. Or, 1 foot, 0.305 meters. Just remember, which one of these you pick is just dependent on the problem you have. So in this case, I have feet that I need to cancel out. So that means I need to have feet in my denominator. Ignore the laws of grammar for a second. Okay, and then I have 0.035 meters up top. Feet here, feet also in the numerator, so they cancel out. And now, if I look all the way across my numerator, I see that the only units I have are meters. If I look across my denominator, the only unit I have is hours. So right now, I'm in units of meter per hour. We're getting there. Just remember from earlier, from the previous examples I was showing, that there's 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. And once again, meters, I need these to cancel out up in the numerator, so I have to put meters in the denominator. Okay, so these cancel, and I'm done converting my numerator. So now what I would recommend is just multiplying all of these terms, right? So multiply 60 over 1 times 5,280 over 1 times 0.305 over 1 times 1 over 1,000. And that gets you 96.624. And I looked at my units up top. The only units I have that weren't converted or crossed out are kilometers per, remember that per 1. I look at the denominator. only units I have that aren't crossed out is hour. So right now I'm in kilometers an hour. So I still have to change that hour, right? So let's put what I start with. So now I have 96.624 kilometer per hour. Okay, I don't need to do anything to kilometer. That's already exactly what I need to ask. But I need to change hour. Okay, well, pretty easy conversion, you know. I can just go from hour to minutes, and then I can go from minutes to seconds, right? So it's exactly like connect the dots, right? I know that eventually I need to end up with seconds, and I have hour. Well, okay, I can go from hour to minute, and then minute to seconds. It's just like a bunch of series of little steps, little conversions that will eventually at the end get you to exactly what you want. So if I have hour in the denominator and I need it to cancel out, I need to put it up in the numerator, 1 hour per 60 minutes. And then so this cancels out. And then I have minutes in the denominator. I need that to cancel. So that means that I have minutes up top and seconds on the bottom. All right. We multiply everything across, and the number we get is 0.02684 kilometers per second, right? So just looking across the units, I only have kilometers in the numerator, and I only have seconds in the denominator. So that gets me my final units of kilometers per second. So a lot of times you'll see these really long unit conversions like this, right? I mean, I could have done some super long expression that combined both of these lines. But what's the point of that, right? That's just going to confuse you if you can't handle that level yet. So I would just recommend small steps. Use this idea of connecting the dots, right? Going from, I know how to get miles to feet. So let's just do that first. I know how to get feet to meters, and I know how to get meters to kilometers, right? And eventually you see I got from miles to kilometers, and I didn't have to do some crazy unit conversion I'm not too familiar with. It's just a series of a bunch of smaller ones. So in the next video, we'll start going over a little bit more advanced unit conversions. It'll be solely focused on the idea of the gas constant from chemistry, and we'll talk about how to convert to different values of the gas constant.